Well, I see we've all survived Christmas and New Year's Eve, which is an accomplishment in and of itself. I mean, regardless of whether it involved family members coming home for the holidays or having to make the cross-country trip ourselves and worrying about food and gas and lodging, I think we'd all agree that the last month or so has been stressful, right? But for better or for worse, we've gotten through it. And now we're entering what should be the time we settle into the dog days of winter, something we talked about last week. And even though it's cold and gray and there's precious little to look forward to in the next few months, at least it should be stress-free, right? Of course, that's not the case around here at Cove. Certainly not for y'all and certainly not for me and my family. You see, as most of y'all know, this is my last month here with you. And because of that, both you and I have to figure out what we're going to do starting on February 1st. And I think we'd all agree that this transition is going to be stressful. I mean, I'll be unemployed. I'll be unemployed for the first time in 35 years. And y'all will be without a minister. And I'll tell you, since the academy is scheduled to move at the end of the month, this is going to be one quiet building most of the week. If we were in another time of year, you could hear the crickets chirp. And so I don't think any of us will be entering the post-Christmas doldrums anytime soon. And so as I was thinking about what I might say during my last 4 messages here at Cove, it seems to me that it would probably be a good idea for us to take a look at measuring our spiritual maturity. And specifically determining how well we may be able to face the kind of transition we're all facing. And so during the next 4 weeks, we'll consider our strength and our faith, our hope and our love. Because when we take them together, not only do these make a person spiritually mature, let's get real, there are also 4 things we're going to need as we move into an uncertain future. And this morning, we'll start by focusing on strength and how it relates to our spiritual maturity. And to do that, we'll talk about from where we expect it to come. In other words, if it's something on the inside, within ourselves, or if it comes from the outside, namely from God. And I'll tell you, I think that's important for us to know, because our assumption and perspective will have a huge impact on both our feelings and our attitudes. For example, we can certainly look within ourselves for the strength we need. And I'm talking about all the strength we need. I think this is what people call inner strength. And not only do I believe most people make this assumption, but this kind of introspection is encouraged by our society, isn't it? For instance, the famous artist Vincent van Gogh, or Van Gogh, wrote, "As we advance in life, it becomes more and more difficult. But in fighting the difficulties, the innermost strength of the heart is developed." Of course, even though his heart may have been strong, it didn't do much for his ear. And the great Arctic explorer Richard E. Byrd said, "Few men during their lifetime come anywhere near exhausting the resources dwelling within them. There are deep wells of strength that are never used." Now, that's something that'll keep you warm, especially when, baby, it's cold outside. And if these aren't convincing enough, just listen to what that great contemporary philosopher, and of course I'm talking about Mariah Carey, had to say. You really have to look inside yourself and find your own inner strength. And say, "I'm proud of what I am and who I am." Let's just say looking for strength within ourselves is a big deal nowadays. And even though the Apostle Paul wrote, "I'm glad to be weak or insulted or mistreated or have troubles and suffering," it is for Christ, if it's for Christ, because when I am weak, I am strong. The Lebanese American poet Khalil Gibran wrote, "If the grandfather of Jesus had known what was hidden within him, he would have stood humble and awestruck before his soul." Let's just say looking within for strength is an idea found both within and outside the faith. You see, a lot of folks believe that we, and I'm talking about you and me, have all the strength we need. We've just got to find it. And even though this kind of perspective may be a boost to our collective egos and reinforce that John Wayne-like rugged individualism, I believe it can also affect our feelings and our attitudes. And I'm talking about in a less than good way. For example, if we're considering our feelings, when we start believing that all by ourselves we have all the strength we need on the inside, I think we end up feeling either arrogant when things are going well or a whole lot of anxiety when things aren't. I mean, we're human, aren't we? Right? How can we not feel good about ourselves when we see ourselves as in control and strong? And even though Isaiah warned us that when the Lord comes, those who are proud will be made humble and the Lord alone will be honored, and the writer of Proverbs said too much pride will destroy you, it feels pretty good to be the boss, and it's certainly good to be the king. In fact, when we have all the power we need on the inside, when things are going well, man, at those times I think we can all identify with Cody Jarrett in that great movie White Heat. Like him, when we think we have all the strength we need, my goodness gracious, I'm telling you, we can just plow ahead. And listening to others becomes at best an annoyance and at worst a hindrance. I mean, we don't need anybody. Why? Because we're on top of the world. And that's great, that is, until we're not. And even Cody Jarrett realized that, because when he made that declaration to his mom, what happened? Man, he was blown up. And I'll tell you, I think the same thing happens to us when life blows up in our faces. In other words, if we have no real power beyond ourselves and things suddenly turn south, I believe all that arrogance we may have felt suddenly turns to anxiety, to stress, maybe even to panic. My gosh, if we're all we've got and we're just not enough to get the job done, what in heaven's name are we supposed to do? As a matter of fact, if we're not careful, the anxiety can become so great that we can either rush around accomplishing very little or end up frozen and doing nothing at all. You see, when we look only within ourselves for strength, often we find that we're moving between feelings of arrogance and anxiety. But that's not our only option. I mean, just like we can put all our trust in our inner strength, we can also choose to look outside ourselves for power and direction and peace. And what better place to look than God? Man, we can turn to God to make us strong. And this will happen when we choose to do three things. You see, first, we can decide to recognize our weakness. You know, that even though we may give it our best shot, sometimes we still fall short. For example, listen to how the Apostle Paul described himself to the Romans, and take note that all of this is written in the present tense. That means he was talking about himself, not in the past, but in the present. He said, I know that my selfish desires won't let me do anything that is good. Even when I want to do right, I cannot. Instead of doing what I know is right, I do wrong. And so if I don't do what I know is right, I am no longer the one doing these things. The sin that lives in me is what does them. With my whole heart, I agree with the law of God, but in every part of me, I discover something fighting against my mind. And it makes me a prisoner of sin that controls everything I do. What a miserable person I am. Who will rescue me from this body that is doomed to die? Thank God, Jesus Christ will rescue me. You see, we can accept our weakness. That's one. And after we accept our weakness, second, we can decide to look in the direction of the one who really does have power. And I'm talking about ultimate power. You know, like the prophet Isaiah believed when he wrote, "The Lord gives strength to those who are weary. Even young people get tired, then stumble and fall. But those who trust the Lord will find new strength. They will be strong like eagles soaring upward on wings. They will walk and run without getting tired." You see, we can turn to God. That's two. And then once our focus is clear, third, we can trust that God's eternal and infinite strength is right there for us and will get us through whatever we're facing. It's like the psalmist wrote, "You, Lord, are the light that keeps me safe. I am not afraid of anyone. You protect me, and I have no fears. Brutal people may attack and try to kill me, but they will stumble. Fierce enemies may attack, but they will fall. Armies may surround me, but I won't be afraid. War may break out, but I will trust you. You see, we can look outside ourselves for strength. And I'll tell you, if we do, if we recognize our weakness, and if we accept God's strength, and if we trust that God is on our side, I believe that changes everything. All of a sudden, whatever arrogance we might have felt has to be gone with the wind, replaced by humility. It's like Paul wrote, "Consider your own call, brothers and sisters. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, things that are not, to reduce to nothing things that are, so that no one might boast in the presence of God." He is the source of your strength, of life in Jesus Christ, who became for us wisdom from God, and righteousness and sanctification and redemption, in order that, as it is written, let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord. Now that's humility, an attitude that will enable us to slow down and listen before we act. And I'll tell you something else. When it's not all about us, not only will our arrogance drop, but so will our anxiety. That's exactly what Jesus had in mind when he said, "Don't worry and ask yourselves, will we have anything to eat? Will we have anything to drink? Will we have clothes to wear?" Only people who don't know God are always worrying about such things. Our Father in heaven knows that you need all of these. But more than anything else, put God's work first and do what he wants. Then the other things will be yours as well. Don't worry about tomorrow. It will take care of itself. You have enough to worry about today. You see, once we look beyond ourselves for strength, I believe both our arrogance and our anxiety will decline, and our humility and hope goes through the roof. Of course, believing that there's a power on the outside, well, that's hard for people to accept, especially those who believe in being self-reliant and self-satisfied. But if we're able to take a step back from our world and the values it promotes, I think we'll find a source of strength that will see us through the most challenging transition. And I'll tell you, that's what spiritually mature people are able to do. Amen.